Welcome to Wall Street Unspun with your host, Peter Schiff.
But it's a giant bubble in search of a pin, and it's going to find one.
Are you confused with the ups and downs of the economy and what it means to you?
Don't believe the propaganda, and that's what it is. When you're listening to an analyst on a lot of these popular financial shows, you're not getting investment advice. You're getting propaganda.
Get ready to untangle the web of misinformation provided by the mainstream media.
These firms are trying to sell you stocks. Their real clients, their banking clients, are trying to get rid of stock.
And now, here's your host of Wall Street Unspun, the president of Euro Pacific Capital, and a licensed broker with a passion for truth. It's Wall Street Unspun with Peter Schiff.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another live episode of Wall Street Unspun. This is Peter Schiff doing the show live from my home office in Weston, Connecticut. One of the first Wednesdays in a while. I haven't been on the road going to a political function, so it's nice to do the show from the quiet location here at home. Anyway, I am taking your calls live, 888-678-9597. I am here for the entire hour by myself, 888-678-9597. Remember, I try to do the show every Wednesday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific. We rebroadcast the show on shortwave radio, 5.07 megahertz on Saturdays at 11:30 p.m. and then again 8:30 p.m. I think on Sunday. I forget the Sunday time. And it's also available on my website. We archive it. You can download it on the www.europac.net. All the current and past Wall Street Unspuns are there for you to listen to and, have an idea of what I was saying and when I was saying it. Anyway, tonight is the night of the much anticipated Barack Obama State of the Union address. And there's been a lot of talk about what he's going to say and a lot of rumors of the things that he's going to say. And I will be watching the speech as soon as this radio show is over. And I will be recording a video blog shortly after with my reaction to what he said. And so I would suggest that if you're listening to this, maybe at about 9:30 or so, hopefully that video blog will be up on YouTube. And you can go check it out and get my reaction. But as far as, in advance, obviously, Barack Obama is going to give this State of the Union address in the wake of the victory in the Senate for Scott Brown and the loss of that Democratic seat and what that means about the mood of the country and Barack Obama's waning popularity. So this is a very important speech for him because he wants to try to reach out to a broader base of supporters without alienating his core supporters in the Democratic Party, but reach out to those people who abandoned him to vote for Scott Brown. Now, of course, he's going to talk about a lot of things, and one of the things he's supposedly going to talk about is this spending freeze, and this whole thing is just propaganda. First of all, I think the spending freeze is not supposed to start for about a year. Why wait a year? Let's freeze it right now. Although, why would we want to freeze spending? I mean, spending has already grown astronomically. I mean, why freeze it? We need to shrink it. That's like somebody who, goes on an eating binge and gains, 200 pounds, and then they go on a diet, and the aim of the diet is to freeze their weight. But why would you want to get obese and then freeze your weight? You need to lose your weight. And we need to cut the budget, not freeze it at these extravagant levels. But, of course, what he's talking about freezing is a tiny part of the budget. I mean, all the entitlements are exempted. The defense is exempted. Of course, interest on the national debt is exempted. And then all sorts of things that they've carved out, which would even be part of discretionary non-defense. They said this is off limits, that's off limits. So I think they're only applying it to maybe 400 or 500 billion of the deficit, which is, what is that, 20%, 25% of what the federal government spends? So you're going to freeze that, and the rest of it is growing on autopilot? I mean, what is that going to accomplish? And, of course, they're not even going to freeze it. I mean, they're just talking. Meanwhile, I know that the president is going to talk about some kind of middle-class tax relief. But, again, it's not even any tax relief that might be stimulative. in that it's not going to be lower marginal tax rates that might encourage people to work more. It's simply credits if you have a kid or if you're taking care of an elderly parent. None of these things are going to encourage more work. They're just going to give out money to people who happen to fall into the category. And while that certainly might immediately benefit the people who get the money, it's going to hurt all the people who don't get the money. But ultimately, the government's going to have to run up a bigger deficit to fund these tax rebates or credits, and that's going to hurt the economy. One of the areas that will be hurt the most is going to be small businesses and entrepreneurs who are going to face even tighter credit markets as a result of bigger government deficits crowding them out. And so maybe the government's going to be given, a little bit of money to some of the middle class, but it's not going to make up for the fact that many more people are going to lose their jobs to finance these tax cuts, or that, even some of the people who get these tax cuts will lose their jobs, in which case, what they're being given is a small percentage of what they're losing. We need real meaningful tax reduction in this country, but it can only be accomplished with serious cuts in government spending, not a phony freeze. And we want to reduce income taxes. We want to reduce marginal income taxes for everybody. We don't want to just find little gimmicks to reward certain people. We want everybody to be rewarded, and we want the rewards to be growth-oriented. We certainly want to make it easier for businesses to invest and hire people, which means we want to reduce their regulatory and tax burden. We want to make it easier for businesses to deduct the cost of making their capital investments. There are a lot of pro-growth policies that the president could talk about tonight. I'm sure none of them will get mentioned. Of course, he's probably going to mention health care and education and all the things that they like to talk about. But, spending more money on these things is only going to exacerbate the problem. But anyway, I'll save a lot of money for the video blog and maybe next week's radio show after the president has actually had a chance to speak. Also want to mention this coming weekend, I guess it's probably too late if you haven't already signed up. I know I've sent out several emails. I don't even know if I ever even plugged it on the radio show. I probably should have, but I'm going to be at Mark Skousen's economic conference that he's calling the anti-Davos conference, because the Davos conference is going on right now. And of course, I've never been invited to speak at Davos. And I'm not holding my breath, but I really should be there. But anyway, Mark Skousen is having the anti-Davos rally. It's on my website, Freedom Fest World Economic Summit over in Nassau on Paradise Island in the Bahamas. So that should be a relatively pleasant trip for me. I leave on Friday. I think I come back on Tuesday. I don't know if anybody who's listening is going to be there, but if you are, I look forward to seeing you. If you're not and you want to try to schedule a last-minute trip down in Nassau, you could try to contact them. There's information on my website under scheduled appearances, Freedom Fest 2010 World Economic Summit. Mark Skousen, he's the same guy that does the Freedom Fest in Las Vegas every year, where I normally speak as well. So if you're going to be there, great. If you want to make a last-minute plan, it's going to be this weekend. But I should be back in time to do my radio show next Wednesday, and I'll be able to report back on what went on in Nassau. Anyway, the markets have been very volatile, mostly to the downside for the past week. We continue to see some of the emerging market stocks weak, the Chinese stocks weak. The dollar is continuing to strengthen. Gold and gold mining stocks have been going down. So, obviously, the accounts at Euro Pacific Capital have all been moving down since making their highs very recently. Again, my approach is still one of long-term investing. I don't think that we should try to time these market fluctuations. They're always going to be there. Whenever you're a long-term investor, you know that stock prices are going to fluctuate. They're going to go up and down. I mean, I did not expect the fluctuations to be that great in 2008 when, the foreign markets got killed and the dollar strengthened. I mean, obviously, that downturn would have been great to have been avoided, and certainly in hindsight, it would have been good to have done that. But because that happened, I'm not going to alter my strategy. I do think that that confluence of events was very rare and unlikely to be repeated. I don't think we're going to see stocks decline on that magnitude, and I don't think we're going to see the dollar rally, certainly not in conjunction with one another. So I still think it makes sense to stay invested, but, be smart. Use the pullbacks as opportunities to take more money off the sidelines and get into stocks, particularly for people who have been waiting and watching the markets rally, wishing they had been in. Here we have some significant pullbacks in many stocks. I don't know how much longer the pullbacks are going to go on. I mean, maybe the pullback is over. Maybe it's only halfway over. There's no way to know now. But I think that it does make sense if you have a long-term focus like I do on and a preference for assets rather than paper. If you want to be in real companies and own businesses that pay dividends, I think that, weakness is an opportunity to be more aggressive, to move money that you were holding on in cash or in less aggressive investments. And take these positions and take advantage of what's going on. A lot of us are earning dividends. You got your dividends coming in. It's always good to look for pullbacks as a way to reinvest. Most of the accounts at Euro Pacific Capital are not managed accounts. The managed account program is relatively new. And if your broker hasn't talked to you about the managed account program, make sure and call them and ask them about the managed account program. Maybe you feel that's better for you than the brokerage accounts. But in the brokerage accounts, we have no discretion. So, most of our stocks pay pretty good dividends. So if you've got a lot of dividends that have been accumulating, pullbacks are a great time to try to put those dividends to work. We can't put them to work for you if we don't have discretion. So you've got to contact your broker and say, hey, I noticed that I've got some dividends. The markets have pulled back. You got any ideas? Where should I put this funds? Because the pullbacks are always the best opportunities to add to the positions. And, you have to understand as an investor that there's always going to be noise in the market and not to worry. Just because you buy a stock and it goes down, a lot of people are worried because psychologically they think they have less money because their stock has a lower value. But remember, stocks are one of the few assets that are priced every day because there's always buying and selling. You might own a piece of real estate, but that piece of real estate rarely changes hands. So there is no actual price on a day-to-day basis. But since stocks are very liquid, which is one of the advantages of owning stocks, is you can sell pretty quickly. But what happens is the price on any given day reflects the mood of the buyers and sellers on that day. And, on a day where people are nervous, where a lot of people want to sell, there's not a lot of people who are willing to buy because the market's going down and people are nervous and they want to sell, the prices are going to go down. On the other hand, on days where there's not a lot of sellers, when people are excited and enthusiastic, you have a lot of buyers, not many people want to sell, the prices are higher. That is just noise in the market. As a long-term investor who's owning stocks to be in there for 5, 10 years or more, who's collecting dividends, none of this matters. The stocks are the same stocks regardless of what the price the market happens to assign on any particular day. And the key to being a successful long-term investor is not to be influenced by those price movements, not to be scared, but to use them to your advantage, to try to take advantage of lower prices to reinvest dividends or add to your positions. And, to the extent that you do need to sell some stocks for whatever reason, if you're flexible and don't need the money, then you can always sell into periods of strength. You can lighten up on stocks when the prices are high. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't have that luxury. They invest money in the stock market for a quick profit, and they don't have a long term, and they end up having to sell when prices are low. Or some people go out and borrow money to buy stocks, and they get forced into a position where they have to sell at a very inopportune time. So we discourage that, and we try to prevent clients from doing that so that we don't get put into that position. But anyway, to discuss this in more detail, remember to talk specifically to your broker. That's what they're for. And again, all the investment strategies involve a lot of risk. Whenever you're buying stocks, they can go down. You might sell, you might lose money. When you're buying foreign stocks, there are more things that could go wrong because now you've got the added impact of the currency. So if you want to sell a foreign stock and the dollar happens to go down and the stock goes down, as did in 2008, you got a double whammy. So you've got to be cognizant of the risks and understand what you're doing, but also be cognizant of the risks of not doing this. I mean, there's a lot of risks in staying in dollars. There's a lot of risk in keeping your money in the bank. People don't focus on that because they're not focused on the right thing. Yes, technically there's a very low probability of you losing your dollars if your dollars are in an insured government bank account. But there's a very high probability that your dollars will lose their value. And there's a possibility that they might lose all their value, in which case what difference does it make that you have them? So understand all the risks and then decide the strategy that works best for you. Anyway, let me go to the phones. I know a lot of people are on hold, and so let me see what's on everybody's mind. First up is Eric in New York. Go ahead, Eric.
Hello, Peter. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. I'm a regular listener of yours, and I have a question about I have two questions. One is a subject you've touched on at least briefly, and that is salaries. You're talking a lot about how inflation is going to rise, and you've convinced me of that. I've read and owned both of your books. Can you talk a little bit about how salaries are going to fare in the midst of this inflation? Are we going to be? Will salaries rise at all?
Whether salaries rise will depend on the particular dynamics in that industry or for that person. I think in general, salaries will rise much more slowly than other prices, and in many cases may continue to fall. Remember, we have lots of unemployed people out there, and so when you have a lot of inflation, but also you have a lot of unemployment, it's very difficult for employees to get more money out of their employers. Right. What is ultimately going to happen, of course, is if inflation runs so out of control and if wages don't start to rise, people will just quit. I mean, at some point, people might find, let's say I have a job and I'm not even earning enough money to buy food, it might make sense for me to quit my job and grow food in my backyard, and that might be more effective use of my time. So at some point, as inflation gets so out of control, wages are going to have to rise just to keep people employed. But when you have a lot of people unemployed initially, there's going to be a lot of play in there. I think it's going to take serious increases in the cost of living before most people can get any kind of increase in their pay.
Okay.
And that's what's going to make it. That's what's going to make this inflation so much more painful for average workers, because it's not going to be this wage price thing where wages are going up and prices are going up. It's going to be prices going up and wages staying flat or falling. And a lot of people think, well, then you can't have inflation without rising wages. Sure you can. You just have prices of other things going up. But the price of wages doesn't go up because you got so many unemployed people.
Right. So the percentage that a typical American worker might spend on the percentage of his salary, of his income that he might spend on food and so on and so forth is going to go much, much higher. Salaries, any rise in salaries, you don't expect to keep up with that, correct?
Absolutely. And so what's going to happen, right, as the people who have jobs end up having to spend more of their income on food and energy and those basics, they have less money left over for other things, and so they start cutting back on those discretionary. They don't go to the movies as often. They don't go to a restaurant as often. Maybe they cancel their health club membership. They don't take a vacation. They don't buy new clothes. So as all that starts to happen, then people that work in those industries, they start losing their jobs. And now there's even more unemployment. And so it's going to spiral. And we're never going to get, the right jobs being created because the government is not letting that happen. The government is redirecting resources that would have been available to entrepreneurs to grow and start businesses to employ the people who are losing their jobs in the service sector. But these new jobs are not going to be created because government policy is inhibiting that. So we are destined right now for this spiral of ever-increasing unemployment and an ever-increasing cost of living. And it's, it is going to be, the stagflation of the 70s, only, far worse, because instead of just stagnation, it's going to be depression. And instead of just inflation, it's going to be runaway inflation. So it's going to be terrible.
Right. Okay. even for people in good industries like maybe engineering.
Well, there will be certain industries where there is not a big supply of unemployed talent. So if you're working in an industry where it's hard to replace you, and you go to your boss and you say, "Look, I need a 20% pay raise because the cost of living went up 20% this year," if he can't just tell you to pound sand, if you can quit and go work for another company that will give you the extra 20%, if there's a tight labor market for your skills, then you might be able to command a higher price. You can also, work for a foreign competitor. So it's going to depend on what you're doing for a living. But if you're working behind a cash register at Walmart, you got no chance.
Right. Yeah. Okay. All right. The second question, it's something I've never heard you talk about, but it's something that and I'm sure other people care about, and that is, you've taught me a lot about capitalism and so on and so forth, and you've convinced me of everything. But the one thing I haven't heard you talk about is wildlife. How does capitalism reconcile the rights for, say, animals that have no voice for themselves, that can't speak for themselves?
First of all, animals don't have rights. Animals are animals. But we all care about animals.
Right.
Certainly, and we don't want to. States have a right to enact laws, to protect animals if they want, or to prevent people from being unnecessarily cruel to animals. Obviously, we slaughter animals and eat them.
Sure.
We're killing them and eating them. So you could say that that's cruel. But, in nature that happens. But I do think that what happens in a free market, and you can see this, is certainly with endangered species, that, as a species becomes endangered, it becomes valuable, and that value has that
has an
helps
economic
an
value.
economy preserve. Like I know in Africa, all of a sudden, people were poaching elephants and for their tusks, but all of a sudden, if they're scarce and now there's not as many elephants, they become valuable as elephants because people set up these preserves where you can go and see them, and all of a sudden the economy puts a value on preserving these animals, and entrepreneurs who want to make a profit will find a way to go out and preserve those animals. I know Africa is trying to get, tourism is a big industry. People come there because they want to go on safari. They want to see certain animals, and if they just hunt them to extinction, they're not going to be there. So market forces do work to protect endangered animals to the extent that humans desire and want those animals. But obviously, if there's an animal that nobody cares about and no human, then obviously, they might go extinct. But there are more animals that are extinct than are alive. Extinction is part of evolution, and so we're not here to preserve every species that exists because believe me, it's a good thing that dinosaurs are extinct. I don't think anybody would want to be living with dinosaurs running around.
Right, no doubt. It's just like I said, the I've always wondered how the free market reconciled this notion of animal. They inhabit this earth just like we do, and
they do, but they're not human beings, and animals don't respect our rights. A lion would just assume kill you as look at you. There's no,
Sure.
They're not going to respect our laws, and we can't treat animals as if they're human beings. I think that animals, to my extent, the world is here for our enjoyment. We humans are the dominant species on this planet, and any other species is gonna be second to humans. This is we are the dominant species, and I think that we certainly want to help preserve nature because it benefits us. I don't think that we have to preserve a species because of the species. I think that we want
Agreed.
the world to be a nice place for humans to live. And
Agreed.
And I think the fact that there is a lot of other animals and flora and fauna, I think all that makes the world a better place and a more desirable place to be in. But we have to understand and keep our priorities that they're there to serve our interests. It's not the other way around.
But you're saying though that it seems as though the free market will put a value on animals only after they become endangered.
In many cases, yeah. I mean, because if they're so abundant, I mean, that's the way markets work. I mean, nothing, you don't have value in abundance. I mean, as things become scarce is when they become valuable. And of course, as animals become in danger of extinction, then you start breeding them. Humans will start breeding animals in captivity and releasing them into the wild and doing something about it. But anyway, that's enough on that subject. I know I got a lot of people calling, but thanks for the call.
Thank you, Peter.
Hey, I want to mention briefly, too, I forgot, I was watching these hearings today in Congress when they're grilling, Tim Geithner. And believe me, he deserves to be grilled because he's done a terrible job and he's guilty of many of the things that the congressmen are accusing him of. I just hate to see him grilled by congressmen because in many cases, these congressmen are just as culpable as Geithner. And it's such hypocrisy to see these guys putting him on the spot. I'd love to be there putting them on the spot. But, one of the things I wish somebody would have said, when Geithner is saying that we had to bail out AIG, right? We had to do it to save the economy. Well, even if you buy that, even if you buy the fact that they had to bail out AIG, and I don't buy that fact, okay? I think we would have been better off if we let them fail, okay? But even if you buy that we had to bail them out, why did we have to make everybody whole, right? Goldman Sachs got $14 billion from AIG that they wouldn't have got had the government let AIG go bankrupt. Now, why did the government have to make Goldman Sachs whole? Was that really part of the national interest? Was it really vital to the average American that a few thousand people who are very rich that work at Goldman Sachs get a whole lot richer? Was that really so vital? Were these massive bonuses to Goldman Sachs executives, were they necessary? I mean, the economy couldn't have survived if these guys didn't get those bonuses. I mean, the whole thing is ridiculous. I mean, do they really have to defend that? I mean, they certainly could have bailed out the AIG situation, but made sure that companies like Goldman Sachs had to pay for their own reckless speculating. Remember, Wall Street made a fortune when the real estate bubble was inflating. And when it burst, very few people on Wall Street had to give the money back. Some people did. Some people at Bear Stearns gave a lot back, and some people at Lehman Brothers gave it back, but not the people at Goldman, not the people at Morgan, not the people at J.P. Morgan. Why? Why did certain individuals get bailed out? Because they had better connections in the government. And the whole thing is ridiculous for Geithner to try to say that they had to bail out these Wall Street investment banks and that was in the national interest. Of course not. Does anybody think that the country would even miss a beat if the equity, at at Goldman Sachs was wiped out? No, they wouldn't. I mean, all Goldman Sachs is the people that work there. They don't have any. It's not plant and equipment. It's all people. You don't think those people could work someplace else? You don't think that that the trading that's done through Bear Stearns, you don't think that stuff could happen through other firms? Of course it could. Excuse me. The whole thing is nonsense. But it is a complete and utter farce, and it just boils my blood to have to watch it because the hypocrisy is just enough to make you want to vomit. Anyway, let me go to the next caller. It's Brian in Texas.
Oh, hi, Mr. Schiff. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
Thanks for calling.
Oh, hey, thank you. I just had 3 brief questions I was wanting to ask you. I've heard you say before that you think that our debt is public and private issue. It's just so huge now that there's a good chance our government's going to have to at least partially default on it. I guess the concern I have with that is if our government does that, don't you think that countries like China could just say, well, okay, we'll just go ahead and nationalize all those companies that you have stock in, and we just won't honor your stocks anymore? Couldn't they turn around and do that?
I suppose there is a risk.
They seem like the kind of people that would do something like that.
Yeah, but I mean, you're talking about government defaulting on a government obligation versus private citizens. So to the extent that, the U.S. government had any assets there, but as far as I don't think that China is going to set aside rules of private property, because if it would undermine its own market-based economy. If the Chinese government seized assets owned by Americans, that would undermine their capital markets. That would cause Germans, or that would cause Japanese who have investments in China to fear. So I don't think that the Chinese would do that. I mean, I think that the way they would retaliate, to the extent they retaliate, is they would certainly allow their currency to rise. They wouldn't be buying any more of our bonds. They wouldn't lend us any more money, and I think we would be in trouble. But ultimately, I think that default is the better alternative to the inflation. That's the more likely alternative, unfortunately. I think that what our government is going to do is pay the Chinese every dollar that they're entitled to. Unfortunately, those dollars aren't going to buy very much. That's going to be the problem. And that's going to be the problem for all the other people who own U.S. government debt, including American citizens. Because when the U.S. government prints a bunch of dollars to pay off the Chinese, Americans are going to be hit with the same inflationary impact. So it's going to wipe out dollar-denominated debt all around the world, not just in China.
Well, it just seems like they've pretty much used us to gain technology, and we've taught them how to make things. And it seems like pretty soon they're going to know everything that we know, and they won't really have a use for us anymore. And so I'm just wondering, if all we have is our little pieces of paper, that they could just say, well, we're not, since you inflated your currencies and, basically destroyed all the debt you owed us, we're just not going to honor your stock. I mean, most governments, you figure would not do that, but since they are a communist still, and I guess they would consider that they don't really owe us any favors. I mean, I just keep that in the back of my mind. And then, the other question I had is, and I don't know, I just wanted, since you're a professional, I was wanting to ask you, I had heard that if we, to eliminate our debt, if we just basically printed the money, just did away with the Fed, just have the government print the money to pay off the debt, which would cause a lot of inflation. But while you're doing that, simultaneously raise the reserve requirements to $1 for $1. That means if a bank wants to loan $1, they have to have $1 in reserves, no fractional reserves. Could you do that to do away with the deficit?
Look, well, the only way to do away with a deficit is for the government to cut spending, because the deficit is a function of how much they spend relative to what they collect in taxes. And so,
well, I didn't mean
the
debt,
deficit's
I meant debt. I mean, because you would eliminate fractional reserve currency.
No, because, the government debt's got nothing to do with that. I mean, the national debt is $13 trillion. I mean, you're not, we're not going to eliminate it unless we default or create massive inflation and pay it off that way. So, I mean, there is no way out of this mess that doesn't involve default in one form. I would just assume default legitimately. I would just assume have the U.S. government acknowledge that it has borrowed too much money. It has committed American citizens to repay debts that are beyond its ability to pay, and work out some kind of restructuring with our creditors that's fair to everybody. I mean, I don't want to tell our creditors that you're going to get nothing, okay? But the alternative is that we print a lot of money and they end up getting less in real terms. So let's try to work out a meaningful restructuring where creditors take a hit, where people who were made promises for Social Security and Medicare take a hit. Let's find the best way to restructure our liabilities, both real and contingent, to try to bring the national balance sheet back into some semblance of being manageable. That's what we need to do. We need to work out these debts, and we need to put a mechanism in place to prevent the country from going deeper into debt again. We have to stop this. I'd like to take away the power of the government to deficit spend. If the government wants money, let them raise taxes. And if they can't raise taxes, then maybe there's no public support for the spending that they want to do.
Well, isn't fractional reserve banking where, say, a bank has $1 and they can loan out 10? Doesn't that cause a lot of our inflation?
Well, I mean, fractional reserve banking, if the government wasn't involved, money supply would expand and contract with economic activity. But yeah, I mean, if we were to go back to a real monetary system where there was gold and where bank deposits were not government guaranteed, then banks would by default have to maintain much more reserves on their balance sheet because they would have to worry about a run on the bank. And so if we had free market banking with sound money, that would automatically rein in the excesses of fractional reserve banking because banks would not be able to run their reserves that low, or they would risk not having money to meet redemptions.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, thanks a lot for the call. Let me hop to the next caller here. The next one will be, I think, Len in New York.
Hi, am I on?
You are.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. You know, I always love listening to you because you make so much sense, even though I disagree with you so many times on social policy. But I had a couple questions for you tonight. The first is I saw a Bloomberg piece that said that Europeans collectively in euros were going to issue $2.2 trillion in debt this year, although I contacted the guy who wrote the article, and he didn't know how much of that was rolled over and how much of that was new debt. Have you got any? I mean, we know what our budget deficit is here, but do you have any idea what collectively those guys' budget deficits are going to be this year?
Whose deficits again? I missed that.
Well, the collective European group, you know, between Greece, Germany, France, Italy, all those countries.
Yeah, I'm not sure. There are some pretty sizable deficits in those countries, and what my hope is that the European Union or the ECB does absolutely nothing to bail those countries out and forces those countries, like Greece, where their bonds are getting clobbered, forces Greece to either substantially cut government spending or default on its debt. That would be a very positive thing for Europe in general. If the ECB were to bail out, let's say Greece, to lend it money to buy its debt to prevent a default or to prevent dramatic cuts in government spending, that would be a disaster, I think, for Europe, because it would create the moral hazard that would completely undermine the credibility of the euro. And I don't think that would necessarily be good for the U.S. dollar. It might be a little bit good in the short run for the dollar to the extent that the euro is compromised, but that would simply put the euro in as bad a position as the dollar, although probably not quite as bad. But it would be very, very good for gold, and it would be good for Asian currencies and European currencies that were not part of the euro bloc.
You're not very heavily invested in Europe at all, I assume.
No, we are. I mean, we're not in those countries. The countries that we are in are not. We're not in Greece. We're not in Portugal.
Because Germany, France, all of them are really running deficits.
Well, but not to that magnitude. I mean, Germany, France is in much better shape. So those aren't the problem countries. I mean, those countries, key Germany is in much better shape than the United States. The deficits are much smaller. It's in some of these other countries, and they've got to get the political will to bring their government spending into order. And if the ECB holds firm and refuses any kind of assistance, then it will force fiscal austerity on these countries, which will be very positive for Europe and positive for the euro.
Gotcha. The other question, I could ask you a million questions, but the other question that came to mind when I was And the fact that I'm queuing up for the show is a testament, considering Obama's speaking soon, and I'm just curious because he's got everybody's ear tonight. But, that Supreme Court decision last week, which said pretty much that corporations are individuals, and I can envision a few months down the road, if you were to win your primary and run against a Democrat, then the Goldman Sachs who you just blasted, the other banks, and all the ones that you want to pay higher interest to the Fed, ganging up on you and drowning you out with corporate ads. I'm wondering, as a libertarian, how you feel about that decision.
About what decision? Sorry.
The Supreme Court decision that says you can have unlimited, corporations can spend unlimited on campaign ads. And if they were to devour the airwaves against you, and even if for some reason,
I think most of the campaign finance laws are unconstitutional, and I just assume them be repealed. I think there's a whole bunch more that should be repealed. Do I think that corporations should be spending money to promote politicians? Well, if the shareholders feel that is a good use of corporate funds, then they should be able to do it. If other shareholders object to it, then they should be able to raise those objections or sell their shares or whatever they want to do. I don't think that unions. I don't think that unions should be allowed to donate, because unions are donating money that is taken from, in many cases, taken from their membership by force. And
what if the members voted
the union,
for it?
Huh?
What if the members voted for them spending the money?
I know, but a lot of the rank and file whose union dues are being used, they might actually support the opposite candidate, and they have no redress. I mean, whereas if you're a shareholder of a company and you don't like what they're doing, you don't like the candidate, you could sell your shares. You don't have to be a shareholder, but you have to be a union member if you want to keep your job, and you're forced into the union. So I think that there are some problems there.
If you wanted to invest in the oil company, you'd still have to own the company in order to be they may not be making the decision that you like, but you still have to invest in that company if you wanted to take advantage of, say, their particular oil field that you think is going to be prolific and make you money.
Right. Well, then you've got to take the good with the bad. I mean, you're not going to like all the decisions that the executives make. If you like more of the decisions.
I guess the question goes to, apart from in my mind, the insanity, the concept that a Philippine corporation could come, or a Chinese corporation, which would be possibly owned by the Chinese government, can come in and spend money for or against you in a campaign.
Well, look, here's the thing. The Congress that we have now is atrocious. It's horrific, right? So what you're saying is, we don't want to let all this money come in because it might ruin our government. It might corrupt our politicians. They're already corrupt. It's already a disaster. It can't get any worse.
Well,
it might be better.
It could get worse. We always find it could get worse.
I don't think so. I think maybe if we had, if we could overcome some of these corrupt incumbents. I mean, most of these campaign finance laws are there because the incumbents don't have to raise any money. It's so difficult to unseat an incumbent, and so the easier it is for challengers to raise money, the easier it might be to have some turnover in Washington. So I'm in favor of making it easier. I'd like to take off the individual limits. I think individuals should be able to donate much more money to campaigns. I mean, right now, if a really wealthy person cares about the country and they have a candidate that they think is going to do a good job, like me, they can't give me a lot of money. They'd have to run themselves. You'd have to have, if a billionaire really wanted to back a client, they could, a candidate, they can't do it. They'd have to just run themselves if they wanted to spend all their money. But anyway, I thank you for your call. Let me move on to Al in South Carolina.
Hello, Peter.
Hey, Al.
I wanted to ask you about the Canadian Energy Trust. They'll be going to, most of them, or many of them, some of them that I own, are going to be changed to corporations. I was wondering what you thought about their share price. We'll have multiple expansion on those, or what do you think?
I don't know. I think that they've already been discounted heavily. I think it was a mistake for the Canadian government to change the laws that existed with respect to these trusts to make them more efficient vehicles to distribute income to shareholders. But I think the damage to the price has already been done because it's been fully discounted into the market. I don't think the multiples will change on these stocks. I mean, they're not going to trade at higher multiples because they're corporations. So, I think it was a net negative for the Canadian government. I think these income trusts were good vehicles, and by taxing them higher, I think that they diminished their value, and some of these trusts ended up getting bought out by foreigners at prices that would have been impossible, or had they not changed the taxes. So I think overall Canadians were hurt by that decision.
I have one more question about the Fed. Later on in the year, they're talking about reining in the liquidity, and they have a bunch of schemes, raising interest rates on their CDs, so banks will keep the money in their reserves, or raise interest rate, which will cause them to raise interest rates for private corporations. But I mean, they're talking about reining in liquidity, but none of this liquidity is out there yet, right? I don't understand. How do you see the rest of this year unfolding as far as
well, there is plenty of liquidity out there. I mean, people are talking about the fact that some of the liquidity is not going to small businesses. Well, because all of it is going to the government. I mean, liquidity is going into speculation. It's gone into the financial markets. It's gone into government bonds. That's where it's going. It's going to prop up failing industries like General Motors or. So there's plenty of liquidity out there. The problem is it's going in all the wrong places because of the government.
Mm-hmm. So, but the banks still don't they have about $1 trillion worth of reserves still at the Fed?
Well, they're not. I think those reserves are in securities that are earning interest. They're not just. They're getting paid on those on that money. I mean, what are they supposed to do? I mean, what should the banks do with it? I mean, make loans to consumers who are already loaded up with debt and who are likely not to pay the money back? I mean, so the banks have to make a responsible loan, because a lot of these banks are already insolvent based on the loans on their books right now. I mean, we need viable loans to businesses. We don't need banks making more loans to consumers so that they can buy things on their credit cards. And remember, there's a lot of mortgage loans out there. A lot of people are refinancing their homes. A lot of people are still buying homes. That money is coming from the government. So the credit that is going to homeowners and home buyers is credit that's not available for the real economy.
Yep. But if the Fed bumps up interest rates even a couple of basis points, it'll knock gold down and prop up the dollar, even if it's not
I don't think so. Just remember, when we started raising interest rates from 1% up to 5 or 6%, wherever they peaked out, right? The whole time the Fed was doing that, the dollar was falling and the price of gold was rising. So just because the government raises interest rates, that doesn't mean the dollar goes up or gold goes down. Now, I agree if we got very aggressive on rate hikes, not a little bit, but if they really jacked them up high, yes, that would boost the dollar and hurt gold. But I don't see them doing that. I see that to the extent that they ever do start to raise interest rates, it's those little teeny baby steps that they did before.
Yeah. So as we approach the election, how do you think it's going to play out this year? Because you've often said that they can raise interest rates because it'll just knock the economy.
Look, I think they're going to try to keep rates low all the way through the election. But I think that the economy is going to worsen from now until then, despite the fact that the GNP numbers might be, on the positive side rather than the negative side. I mean, they might slip back to negative by the end of the year. I don't know, but they're not going to be any big numbers. But the unemployment rate is going to keep getting bigger. That's for sure. I do think that prices will continue to edge higher for consumer goods, so inflation will begin to be more noticeable for more people. So in general, the misery index is going to become more miserable, and I think voters who are upset are going to be more upset, and I think hopefully they'll show that frustration at the polls, and more incumbents will lose their seats, particularly some of the bigger spenders in the Democratic side, but also maybe some of the big spenders in the Republican side, and hopefully I'll be elected senator. Hopefully part of that will be that the citizens of Connecticut wake up and and vote me in, and I'll be able to get into Washington and begin the process of cleaning this mess up.
Great. I own a lot of precious metal stocks. I made a lot of money on them. They're backing off a little bit. Still have a big profit. My plan is to ride it through, and I assume you would agree with that.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm doing with mine.
Okay.
So All right. Thanks for the call.
Thank you very much.
We're only got 10 minutes left, so let me take the last two callers that are on hold. Sal from Texas. Go ahead, Sal.
Hi, Peter. Thanks for taking my call. The thrust of my question is dealing with research and development and innovation. I'm kind of embarking on a career in patent law myself, and it seems to me like the market is kind of giving signals that a lot of companies are cutting back on research and development because the market for patent attorneys is kind of down right now. So I was just wondering if you could comment real quick about where you see the next wave of innovation in this country.
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's, the thing about capitalism, and no one person knows what the next wave of innovation is going to be. I mean, if I knew what it was, I'd do it myself, right? I'd innovate it myself, and I'd make all the profits. So the key is, and I get asked these questions when I speak at rallies. What industry should the government target? I mean, what about alternative energy? What about wind? What about solar? And I always respond that the government should stay neutral. The government shouldn't pick any winners. It shouldn't subsidize any particular technology or any, over another, because nobody knows. The best way to solve problems is to allow the market to function, allow individual entrepreneurs to try to solve problems and make a profit doing it. And those that do it wrong will lose money, and they'll stop whatever they're doing. And those that are doing it right will be rewarded with profits, and they'll reinvest those profits into growing what's right. And that's the way it works. That's the best way to maximize our scarce resources and to maximize society's overall standard of living, is to let the forces of the market operate to solve these problems and to bring innovation. I mean, no politicians came up with the automobile or electricity, electric light or indoor plumbing or mass production or the dishwasher or the sewing machine or the washer dryer or the airplane. And they didn't come up with telephones and televisions and radios and microchips and computers and cell phones and the internet. I mean, none of these things, some government people decided that they should be there. They all came about because individual entrepreneurs tried to make money. That's it. And when they did something, people always, there's a economic truism that supply creates its own demand, and I hear them. They touched upon that on CNBC today without realizing it, but nobody knew they needed an iPod until Apple invented it. I mean, now everybody wants them, but nobody needed it until it was there. Somebody had to come up with the idea, and now all of a sudden, they're there. I mean, nobody needed a cell phone until they were invented. There are a lot of things that nobody needed until somebody came up with the idea and showed that it was possible. So who knows? But all I know is we're going to have a lot less innovation. We're going to have, if the government is in the way, if the government is regulating and taxing and redistributing and subsidizing, the entire economy is going to be less efficient. And all the big new breakthroughs and all the new innovations will be taking place in other countries. Anyway, thanks for the call. The next last caller for the night is Brad in Wisconsin.
Hey, Peter. I got a quick question.
Hey, Brad, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good. I know you deal with a lot of personal finance issues, but how would a larger company be able to protect itself, coming into these next couple of years? I mean, would they want to establish trade with, Canada, or would they want, buy assets now before they start to get really expensive, or?
What was the beginning of that question again? I keep getting distracted.
No, that's all right. How would you protect yourself if you're a mid-sized company?
I think it depends on. First of all, you got to look at what your business is. I mean, certain businesses are going to do well in this environment. Certain businesses are not. I mean, so you got to understand. What is your customer? What are you doing? Are you export oriented? Do you have products and services that you're selling abroad? or you mainly stuck with a domestic consumer, and what where on the, if you're part of discretionary spending, again, your business is going to shrink. So I think businesses have to prepare for the changes and make sure that they're able to weather those changes. Maybe they have to cut back their overhead, or they have to shrink their capacity, or try to find ways to change their business. I would certainly, if I had debt, I would try to have very long-term debt. I would try to get the longest maturities I can at the lowest possible rates and lock that in. But and I would try to make changes to the business to anticipate what the market is going to be like in a much more austere American economy, but also one where there's a lot of inflation.
Right.
Certainly as business owners, they can find a way. They can invest money in things that will do counter cyclical to their business. Have money in precious metals. Have money invested abroad. There are a number of things that people can do to try to preserve their wealth and to prepare for a more hostile business environment.
And when on a personal level here, when purchasing silver, I know you like to lean towards the junk silver more than, I don't know, a maple leaf or an eagle. Is there a reason for that?
Well, just for junk silver, I think you get good value. I think it's a good way to buy small denominations for silver that ultimately might be utilized in barter transactions,
Small things like that. Do you think there's any manipulation in that market? It seems like when it hits the COMEX right away in the morning, it's a 20 to 30 cent drop immediately.
Excuse me?
Yeah, do you type of manipulation, once it hits the COMEX market in New York, it seems like it'll drop a quarter within an hour.
Yeah, I mean, it's just I don't think it's no manipulation. I mean, that's markets, sometimes you get a preponderance of orders, either sells or buys, coming at the open, coming overnight, and and sometimes the markets gap in one direction. But I don't think it has anything to do with manipulation, more so than It's not government manipulation. I mean, there could be some market makers involved in in trying to pair off the orders, but it's nothing nefarious where governments are trying to manipulate the market.
Okay. All right. I think that's all the questions I got. So thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah, I've been a little distracted. I'm trying to work out a couple of other things while I'm doing the show. I apologize. Anyway, we're running out of time now. We got about 3 minutes left. So, as I said, the president is going to be speaking in 3 minutes. And so let's make sure and watch this theater, which is what it is. And I'm sure the president's going to have, certain people in the audience that he's going to point out. Maybe he's going to find some unemployed person who's lost their health care, and whoever he can stand up and say how he feels their pain and how he's staying up late, working late, making sure that he gets them health care and gets them a job. They pretend that they care so much about our problems, and I wonder if it even dawns on them that they're the source of our problems, and the more they try to fix them, the worse they make them. Do they know that, or are they just that dumb? Who knows? I don't know if we'll ever know the answer to that question. I think I'll find out firsthand if I get elected to the U.S. Senate, because it seems like the only way my ideas are ever going to get heard in Washington is if I go there as a Senate and speak them myself on the Senate floor, because otherwise my opinion is never going to get into that chamber, because I just don't have the connections to get in there. So I've got to, bring the fight directly to the House and the Senate. And maybe if I actually have a chance to sit down with these people and talk to them, I'll find out if it's just stupidity or ignorance or something else. But anyway, that's it. I'm running out of time. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Don't forget, shiftforsenate.com. If you haven't contributed or signed up to volunteer, we need donations. Pick up a copy of Crash Proof 2.0. And make sure to call up Euro Pacific Capital to open up an account or talk to your broker, 800-727-7922, 800-727-7922. Take care, everybody. Be back again next week with another live episode of Wall Street Unspun. This has been Peter Schiff, president of Euro Pacific Capital, candidate for the United States Senate as a Republican in the great state of Connecticut. Take care, everybody.